Singapore is located in the southeastern part of Asia. The main cultural traditions are Malay, Indian, Chinese, and to some extent British. It borders Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. Singapore emerged as a nation after 1965. For nearly 150 years, it has been a British colony that was immediately linked to the whole Malay Peninsula. Singapore is a true city-state, meaning that the entire country and city of Singapore is the same thing, and it is 277.3 square miles. To emphasize how small that is, the entire country could fit inside New York City with ease, seeing that New York City is 304.6 square miles. The place name Singapore comes from the word Singapura, which means the city of the lion. It was a commonly used term and has been around since the 14th century.
The country of Singapore has religious freedom. Singapore has been described as one of the most religious countries in the world. The major religions are Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and folk religion, along with a substantial number of Christians of various denominations. According to the graph, the population of Singapore in 2014 is 5.3 million, with the male population being 2,728,825, and the female population being 2,555,624. About half the population lies between the ages of 25 and 54. Nearly 80% of men and about 50% of women are employed. Women have joined the workforce in large numbers, but are underrepresented in leadership positions in all areas and institutions.
Singapore is a republic with a parliamentary system of government. The city-state and former British colony adopted the Westminster model after it gained independence on August 9th of 1965. There are three branches of the government of Singapore: executive, legislative, and the judiciary. The President of the Republic of Singapore is Singapore's head of state. In the Westminster Parliament system, as which Singapore governs itself, the Prime Minister is the head of the government, while the position of President is largely ceremonial. The current President is Tony Tan. He is currently the 7th President of Singapore and has been in office since 2011. He first served as a member of the Singapore Parliament from 1979 to 2006.
The World Governance Indicators Rule of Law shows that Singapore has an index of 2 and a rank of 95, while the United States has an index of 2 as well and a rank of 90. GDP for Singapore is 307,871,907,186, while the United States GDP is at $17,419,000,000,000. GNI at PPP for Singapore is $439,144,184,653, while the United States is at $17,812,700,000,000. And GNI per capita at PPP for Singapore is $80,270, while the United States is at $55,860.
Singapore's HDI is 0.901 with a ranking of 9, while the United States has an HDI of 0.914 and a ranking of 5. The Transparency International CPI Index and rank for Singapore is the following. The index is 84, with the rank being 7 out of 175. The United States has an index of 74 and a rank of 17 out of 175. Freedom House Freedom Index for Singapore is the following. The freedom rating, political rights, and civil liberties are all 4, while the United States for all 3 of those categories is 1. According to the Heritage Foundation Economic Freedom, Singapore has an overall score of 89.4. The United States has an overall score of 76.2. The graph that is being showed will break it down even further for you. According to Hofstede, in power distance, Singapore has a score of 74 and the United States has a score of 40. Singapore displays more respect for authority and is more accepting of inequality between higher and lower positions. In individualism, Singapore scores 20 and the United States scores 91. Singapore is a more relationship-oriented country. In masculinity, Singapore has a score of 48 and the United States has a score of 62. Singapore is more prone to being caring and sentimental towards one another. In uncertainty of avoidance, Singapore scores 8 and the United States scores 46. Singapore is more adaptive and accepting to change, whereas in the US, people prefer a moderate level of structure and guidance and normalcy. In long-term orientation, Singapore scores 72 and the United States scores 26. Singapore scores higher in long-term orientation compared to the United States because the United States is more interested in achieving short-term goals and instant gratification. And finally, in indulgence, Singapore scores 46 and the US scores 68. This means that Singapore is less prone to spend free time having fun and taking life a little more seriously than the US. According to Globe Studies, which is an expansion on Hofstede, there are 6 more categories that need to be discussed. The first is assertiveness. In Singapore, the practices is 4.06 and a value of 4.5, while the US has a practice of 4.5 and value of 4.36. The next is institutional collectivism. Singapore has a practice of 4.77 and a value of 4.42. The US has a practice of 4.21 and a value of 4.2. We then have in-group collectivism with a practice of 5.66 in Singapore and a value of 5.46. The US has a practice of 4.22 and a value of 5.79. Gender egalitarianism in Singapore has a practice of 3.52 and a value of 4.43. The US has a practice of 3.36 and a value of 5.03. Then we have humane orientation, which in Singapore has a practice of 3.29 and a value of 5.66, while the US has a practice of 4.18 and a value of 5.51. And finally, we have performance orientation, with Singapore having a practice of 4.81 and a value of 5.7, while the US has a practice of 4.45 and a value of 6.14. In Trumpenars, there are also a few categories that need to be discussed. Universalism versus particularism, Singapore scored 69 and the US scored 93. Singapore believes more in circumstances dictate the rules, more so than in the United States. Also, in specific versus diffuse, Singapore scored 58 and the United States scored 82. Singapore is less specific than the United States because we believe that who we are depends on the environment in which we are in, such as work, grocery stores, or home, whereas in Singapore, they believe that relationships and roles are the same regardless of their current environment. Singapore tries to maintain a clean environment. At one point, they were among some of the top countries to have a high emission of carbon dioxide. This in turn caused a loss of about 30% of the mangrove areas, which are trees or shrubs that grow in chiefly tropical coastal swamps that are flooded at high tide. The Ministry of the Environment and Anti-Pollution Unit work hard to make sure that they maintain a good environment. Singapore is also short on water. The Water Pollution Control and Drainage Act help with this, along with recycling water after it's been distilled.